So this week, I will still be talking about Trump tariff, but this week, I think the situation is slightly better than last week. We have seen a very green days. So I think in the mind of many investors is that has the market bottom. So I try to address these questions, and then I will also try to revisit back the topic that I raised last week, talking about what is Trump actually doing. I think this one not so easy because I am also learn on the go and try to read as much as possible, try to understand what's the rationale, what's their long-term strategy, stuff like that. So I think that one will need more time to digest. Okay, let's start with the market first. Okay, market up by 8.3% over the past 1 week. It is a good week, relatively speaking, because previous week was quite bad, right? And then if we look at QQQ, up by 11.4% last week. And if you look at the day on 9th of April, right, market actually up by 9.5%. I use the same set of data, which is from 1990s. If you rank by S&P 500 daily returns, right, that 1 day jump, right, is the third highest based on the data after 1990s. So the other first place and second place are both in 2008, and then the fourth and fifth place are 2020 COVID crash. So you can notice, right, usually when this market drops significantly, especially during short period of time when the rebounds come, right, it also can come very sharply. I think I also mentioned in last week TCSS also, right, I said market will be red and then suddenly we'll have a big green. So I won't be surprised by all this just because of market is super volatile and everyone is watching the market, everyone is trying to interpret, are these tariff going to go up further? Is this going to drag on? So people are worried and people are concerned, and market, because of all this uncertainty, right, it become very volatile. So you see, if you panic so right at the bottom, right, then you just suddenly miss this 9.5%, right? Usually it will be very difficult to navigate and you will become very frustrated if you get, panic so just before the rally, right? That's why I say sometimes all this long-term investing, it doesn't guarantee like the best returns, because the best return is always that, let's say you sell before it crash down, and then when it crash, you buy, you time the market well, of course you get the best returns, right? Long-term investing is not the strategy to get you the best returns, but at least emotionally, psychologically, if you're just holding on and then just keep deploying DCA gradually, right? At least green days like this, you don't have to be frustrated. You will just think of, oh, this is just market doing its things, right? Over the long period of time, we are talking about, like, let's say 5 years, 10 years ahead, it is the business profitability that drives the return. But over the short period, especially during event like tariff like this, right, when market become very uncertain, market can go up a lot, can come down a lot one. So you just need to be comfortable with the volatility. Okay, so that's market over the past during that green days. Best week since November 2023, up 5.7%, very high returns, right? But actually behind the scenes, right, wow, we have all the trade war, all the down year to date 8.76%, and then yields was mooning, right? That was a bit crazy. Some people speculated that it was China that is dumping all the US treasuries. I think this one, right, as of now, still there's no hard evidence to show that it is China dumping, but it seems that the yield went up quite significantly, and that's real, right? And that one will have a much greater impact as compared to just the stock market, because remember, bond market is much larger and bond market will drive the rest, right? Let's say if the long-term yield go up by another 1%, it will drive the valuations for stock as well. So that one is also something that US government, or let's say Trump's team, is focusing on. I think someone asked him like whether it is because of the bond market that Trump reversed, right? And I think the answer provided was that no, it wasn't related to the bond market. Let's see, okay? But I know that this bond market is definitely something that they are paying attention to, just because it has the potential to create all this instability. I'm monitoring the stock market as well as the bond market. With all this, right, the questions that I'm trying to answer is that, has the market bottom? This is the hardest question to answer, right? Because no one is able to time the market bottom, just the same as no one is able to time the peak. We all can comment about whether market is slightly overvalued or very overvalued. You can look at all the metrics, say for example, like PE, all those things, just to gauge, right? But when it comes to the bottom, when it comes to the peak, that one is definitely impossible to predict. Okay, that one I have to put it first. But I think if we just compare the current drawdown, which we are still in the midst of it, we are still not out of the drawdown, and we can compare this drawdown to the previous drawdown, right? I think one thing we can look at is what is the magnitude of the drop. Second thing that we can look at is the duration, like from the top to the bottom, how long would it take, right? And then you can just, look at the current period and compare to the historical period. Just look at it. I'm not trying to say this drawdown is the same as the past drawdown, because every drawdowns, every crisis, they are all due to different reasons, and then the magnitude of drawdown is different, the duration also different. But at least we can look at this and compare to the past, right? So right now, as of 13th of April, you can see this drawdown, right? Actually, it started around end of February. Now the drawdown, right? I'm not talking about the drop up until today's point. I'm talking from the top to the worst that we have seen, right? The drawdown is about 21%, and the duration is about 47 days. So that's about 1.5 months. Let's say if right now at current period, and then market just never create another new low, right? And recover from here, right? The period is 1.5 months. Okay, that's Trump tariff. We are not yet getting out of this. We are still in that inside. Okay, let's compare to the previous bear market, 2022. I think this is the drawdown that I experienced the worst in terms of the magnitude of how much money I lost. I lost probably, I don't recall exactly, maybe it's in the range of 200,000 in this 2022 drawdown, right? So 2022 drawdown, top to bottom is about 27% drop. But in terms of the duration, right, that was 282 days. So 282 days, less than 1 year, but still that's many months, right? Like 9 or 10 months, right? That's quite a long drawdown. I still remember quite a number of companies, when they report earnings, the earnings it either came down lower than expected, or actually they all get into like negative growth in terms of revenue, in terms of profits. Even companies that I invested, say for example the tech companies and Nvidia, also dropped quite a fair bit in 2022. That was not very long ago. That was only like 2 or 3 years ago. I think people still remember this period. So just pay attention. The duration, right? It can have like 282 days of drawdown, and the drawdown is not like one straight line, right? It's like down, then up. Then you thought that it recovered already, then create another new low, then up again, then create another new low. So I think like prolonged drawdown like this, right, can last like longer one. So this is one historical period that we can refer to. The other one is 2020 COVID. 2020 COVID was like, okay, there's no like multiple drawdown, multiple new lows. It's just that during the period of like everything's get locked down, right? And then market just dropped sharply, and just within, let me see, 33 days, it dropped by 35%. So in terms of steepness, definitely COVID crisis was a lot steeper. Even current Trump one, I think is not as steep. So that was during COVID period. This is definitely very sharp. Then after that, when it rebound, right, some people say that, oh, it's going to drop further, but then I think back then was that Federal Reserve really pumped the money hard, and then US fiscal, they do the stimulus check, all those things. Both fiscal and monetary policies are really pumping the market hard, right? That's why since the March bottom, and then market just recover from there. So I think that was 2020 COVID. Then 2018, this was, I recall this was more focused on the tech drawdown. Duration is 96 days, and market dropped by 20%. This one wasn't as hard as COVID, and wasn't as hard as the 2022. But let's say if you focus on the tech companies, it was still quite a sizable drawdown. There was, again, there was at least still 96 days, right? 3 months. Currently, we are only 1.5 months in, right? So you see market can draw down for quite long one. And then of course, the very long one is 2008 global financial crisis. That was 512 days. This is like 1.5 years kind of drawdown, right? And market drawdown by 57%. That's why I say, don't think that just because they create a new low, right, and market is already panicked, doesn't mean that it cannot be more panic. So that's why you need to be careful. I'm just saying that all these past drawdown, right, just take this as a reference. It could last, of course, it could last 1 month, and it could last, let's say, 9 months, or it could last 2 years, right? So just remember of that now. So I think the takeaway from all this chart is that market drawdown can persist for many months or even years. Don't assume the market has already reached its bottom. If it's really bottom already, then just, claim victory and just say that, okay, we are all lucky. But let's say if we have another drawdown, just don't be over panic. So all these things can drag on one. You just need to be patient and handle your emotions. Let's move on to tariff. Just want to, because all this tariff news is still keep on coming, right? I think the green days, the 9.5% green days, right, is also because Trump just announced a 90 days pause, right, in terms of the tariff. When he announced that 90 days tariff, right, I think it's to allow time for him to negotiate with all these countries. But at the same time, he increased the tariff on China. I think right now the relationship is really like a solo fight between Donald Trump and China. And you can see that President Trump, I mean on chart on the right, President Trump raised tariff on Chinese goods several times this year. China refrained from retaliating at first, but matched Trump tariff in April. So you can see that right now both countries, right, it's like really like huge tariff between both sides. And then that was the news, right? And then I think the comments from Bessons is quite interesting. He said that this was his strategy all along. Basically, he said that don't retaliate, and then those that doesn't retaliate, right? Okay, now we get a 90 days pause. We get to negotiate. Maybe they can get some sort of good news from there, right? But for those that retaliated, right, especially China, right, then I think now it's like US want to go heads on, like focusing just on China, right? And then his comment is that, and you might even say that he goaded China into a bad positions. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actor. Actually, everyone knows the bad actors is not China. It's really US, right? US is the one that, created all this, right? I think what China did is just, you do one thing, I just retaliate. So it's just back and forth, right? We just match each other. All these things is not created by China. US did all these kind of things, like Trump did this kind of thing. It's also not something that is crazy in my opinion. From his point of view, it's just that all this trade deficit is just too much, and then US losing all these manufacturing productions, right? It's just like unacceptable anymore. So it just like changed in terms of their stance, and he want to make a different, and he's really like creating his legacy, and he really need to do things that is extraordinary to have to be effective. If not everyone, all sides, right, especially all the business community, they will try to block Trump from doing all these things, because all these things that US is trying to do, right, including bring back the manufacturing, right, it's not good for business, because all these businesses currently they are enjoying quite a decent spread, right, by just moving manufacturing to China, producing stuff cheaply, and then just sell to US consumers, right? People are profiting from this. It's just that from Trump's perspective, like all this is not acceptable anymore. He wants manufacturing back now. So that's his strategy now. So I think this is the funny thing. I think let me solo in from China, and then really, right, all the other countries now just take a step back and really just China versus US at the moment, right? So people are saying that which sides blink first. It could be US, because all these tariff, right, it just stopped the trade between US and China, right? And all this is really hurting both sides. So I think they both hurt. That's why I think all this are to create pressure, and the pressure is also on US side, and it's true on China side as well. Both sides have all this high pressure to come to the table and have some sort of agreement. That agreement, how will it look like? It depends on which side has better leverage. I think let's see, right? It's hard to say here. So I think the news coming up during the weekend is that US told China to request a Trump call. So I don't know, is this invite from Trump already? I think from China's side, it seems that they are quite firm in terms of not to be the one to ask for a call, right? It seems that at least on the surface, China seems to have more leverage at this moment. But let's see. I think both sides also have pressure. It's not like one side winning only. They all have their strength and weakness. China's side is that they have all the manufacturing, and US really need China to continue to supply all these cheap goods, right? I think that's on China's leverage. And then US side is that they are still the one that control the consumer market, right? If the tariff is high enough, I think China also will make it hard for them to export to US, right? Yes, they can have all the Vietnam factories, all those things, right? It still increase the cost of logistics by just have to rerouting all the goods through other countries, then only to US, right? And US still can tariff on all these other countries like Vietnam, right? As long as they control the ports, as long as things get into US and they are able to apply tariff, I think US still control their consumer. They still have some leverage there. It's just that all this leverage is also quite painful politically to Trump. They still have the midterms elections that's coming, right? Not too long from now. So they still need to take care of their own farmers. Both sides, right? They have their leverage, and both sides are equally vulnerable. That's why I think at some points they still have to come to the table and negotiate. It's just that we are still early into this. We are only like talking about 1 or 2 weeks into this event, right? Or these negotiations, right? Things will still progress. Things will still change. We are still monitoring, and this one can drag on. It can drag on for multiple weeks or even months. But I think the pressure, both sides also have pressure. And then the latest one that just came out, right? Trump exempts phones, computers, chips from new tariffs. The new changes is that Trump imposed the 145% tariff on products from China, right? Then now it seems that he's going to exempt all these electronic items. The 145% doesn't apply to all these items, like all the electronics electronics items, but the 20% tariff applied on the fentanyl related tariffs, right? This one really applies to all Chinese goods, including electronics, right? This one still applies. So there's still the 20% tariff. So I think at least talking about like who blinked first is at current moment, it seems that Trump is the one that blinked first. I guess all this is because, let's say, if the 145% tariff is applied, right, then it's also very hard for the manufacturing in US because there are many inputs, right, actually came from China's side. That's why sometimes he can just keep on imposing stuff, right? Wow, 100%, 150%. He can do all these things. But you remember all these things, right, is making US and making their businesses suffer as well. I think in terms of Trump, right, he also have limited bullet in terms of how much he can do. I think that's the corrective mechanism on the US side. But from China's side, I don't know. I think it's still tough. Let's say if they are not able to sell to US, now their factories have to close, people will lose their jobs. It is also painful for China as well, right? But based on what we have observing now, right, it seems that China's side, instead of like want to come to the table and negotiate, right, it seems that they are happy to do easing on their side. In simple terms, it's like distribute money to their own citizens and then let them spend more, right? Let them create more demand locally, right? And then just consume their own stuff, right? Instead of like, okay, quickly come to the table. Because if they come to the table too quickly, right, it just shows that they don't have leverage, right? So it's bad for China when it comes to negotiation like this. So they have to play hard also. So we can see both sides also. It's like a bit like childish, but actually if you just observe the details and try to observe the power dynamics, right, it is quite interesting like these things play out. Okay, I think that's all about the latest news, right? I think all this can change very quickly. There's sometimes I feel that there's not much point of like watching the news, right? Because the news is like keep on changing. And then for people who don't understand like what Trump is trying to do, right? They feel very frustrated. Some even say that, oh, Trump announced on his Truth Social that be cool, right? That tweets, right? People say that, oh, all this is market manipulations. I think that you feel that all this thing is market manipulations only if you don't really understand what he's trying to do. Because in terms of what he's trying to do, right, it's not that difficult to understand. I think I mentioned last week, right, for those who haven't watched my last week video, right, just go to the previous week video where I talk about the dwindling down of the US manufacturing productions, and then US GDP as the percentage of world GDP all came down, and then all these trade deficits is like getting worse over time. And partly this is because of the reserve currency status that make USD too expensive, like too overvalued over long period of time. We are talking about decades, right? And all this is costly, especially to US export industry. That's why they have been importing, and by importing, actually it is still an exchange, right? They are actually printing all these US treasuries and then just pass to China, and then in return China send the goods, right? All these things is good for everyone until now suddenly they realize that in terms of the manufacturing, they can't even have the important stuff built in US, and then in terms of security, this is really like make US vulnerable. So they notice all these things, and that's why they feel that they cannot continue anymore. So all these things is still true, right? Meaning that Trump still want to bring the manufacturing back. To understand all this in details, right? Last week I mentioned that article. I think the other things that is better than the article is actually this paper written by Miran. He's the senior strategist. I think he's heavily involved in all this Trump policy. He and Lutnick, right? Two persons together with Elon. I think all these are influential people. I'm still very surprised this paper is out there. He's really outlining the thought process of things behind this Trump tariffs. I try to summarize this paper, but this paper's right, it is about I think 50 pages long. Basically, there are two things that's covered under this paper. One thing is that he talked about tariff, the implications, like the currency offset, those kind of things. And then the other things, right, that he mentioned is that given that the trillion dilemma, this kind of things, right, trade deficit is getting very, very bad. Also because reserve currency status that caused the USD overvalue. So if you want to reverse all these things, that means USD have to devalue. But USD devaluations, right, especially the type of devaluations that is engineered, right, is still very, very, very hard to predict what would be the outcome. So that is actually the riskier things that US could do. The less riskier and the one that is that they feel that they have better gauge, right, and better control, right, is actually the tariff. So that's why between the stuff that they plan to do in order to bring all this manufacturing back, right, it's all quite messy. And right now, as long as Trump just focus on the tariff measures, right, I think isn't still that bad. If the tariff doesn't work, or they feel that they need to do more, right, and they get into all the USD valuation tactics, right, for example, like imposing a fee in terms of the US treasuries on those who keep all these US treasuries to manage their currency, right? And now suddenly US just imposed the fee, right? It's even worse, because that one is some experiment that haven't been attempted before. So that is something that we haven't seen them doing. But still, I think it's still interesting to read on this paper. So to just know that what they're trying to do. I'll cover some of this because I think all these items, all these key points, right, is still very, very important, and it helps us interpret what Trump is trying to do instead of like just reading news. All this news, right? Many of this news is very critical of Trump, and they try to make fun of Trump of anything, right? Which sometimes, yes, it's quite funny. Sometimes it just seems that he imposed all these things without like clear thought process. But still, you don't get the full picture if you don't know the philosophy behind that. So I will cover a few points now. So this one I just mentioned, the Tariff dilemma, which is that the global reserve currency is the one that makes them suffer in terms of trade deficits, and it also harms American manufacturing. And then in many places in US, right, they already lost many manufacturing jobs, and this is really painful. This is why all these people choose to elect Trump. They really sincerely believe that Trump will bring more jobs back to US. So that's one, right? And then second thing, why Trump is like raising all this tariff, right? He sincerely thinks that all this tariff is one source of revenue generation. So he even talk about the external revenue instead of IRS is ERS, right? Bringing revenue from the outside. And he really think that all this revenue is paid by the exporters and not the US consumers. So later we'll talk about this in the next slides. But all these things, right, is really like redistribute the economic burdens of providing global reserve currency assets. Since you are all using my US treasuries, my US assets to do global trades, right? Now, because of that, I already offer my value. In returns, whoever that export to US, you have to just pay tariffs. And that's why these tariff things, right, is not just about China. It's really more broad-based, right? So I think that's one more things. And all this revenue generation is not like to say they have to reduce their debt, right? It's more like managing their debt level. At the same time, they will lowering income tax, corporate tax in order to spur more business activities and manufacturing investment in US, right? So that they all come together. And then the third one, right? This is also very interesting. This one I think not often talked about is that now Trump, right? He view trade as inseparable from national security. So basically what he's seeing is that aside from the US as the reserve currency, right? Trump or US side, right? They are the best in terms of military, right? They are the one that make sure all these global trades, all these shippings can pass on safely, right? Because let's say if there's any pirates, right, that try to disrupt all these trade routes, right? US will really send their military to make sure things progress smoothly, man. So he see this as like the value provided by US, but in return they lost their manufacturing job. That's why he's like trying to impose all this, like make all this burden shared by more people, and the mechanism is through tariffs. And then talking about all this national security is that I think US side, right, they still provide the security umbrella to many nations, including European nations, including like Singapore, right? Still, I think it's under US coverage, right? So I think he just like instead of like providing all these things, right? All these things is not free anyway, because in order to get the protection, you still need to buy US defense system, all those things, right? It's not free. It's just that now he just want to extract more revenue from the security umbrella. So in terms of how to do that, I think that they try to do like different buckets, right? There will be US allies, those who are really like, US supporters. So these nations will get a very low tariff, but there will be nations that belongs to the unfriendly nations, right? Those will be the one that have to pay higher tariff. I think China will be in that categories. I think the key things here is that trade and securities, right, is not two different things anymore. It is the same thing. Because say, for example, let's say a nation that is in between, right? He don't know where to stand, right? In terms of trade, maybe he's indifferent. He say, okay, trade, I don't do with trade with US is also fine. But the moment US say that, okay, if you are not friendly to me in terms of trade, right? You are unwilling to pay all this tariff or you retaliate against me, right? Then if any other country invade you, I won't be there to defend you anymore. So that will actually make all these nations to say, okay, I will stay on the line. I will be with you, right? So I think he's using the stuff that US have as a leverage, and that include their US consumer market and also their military strength, and use these two pillars as the negotiations leverage. So that is also quite interesting. I think we don't hear these kind of things often before Trump took office in his second term. So I think this is fairly new to me. So he's really fully leveraging on all these things. Yeah, the burden sharing things I think I have mentioned. Basically, he's trying to compel all the trading partners, right, to open their markets, to remove their trade barriers, protect intellectual property, and share more equitably the cost of global economics and security provisions. It's just that the mechanism is through tariffs. So I think I would say that most countries, right, let's say if they notice that they have no choice, right, they will just pay. Not the kind of like 30-40% tariffs. I think the low percentage, right, let's say like 10% tariff, right, I think that one will stay. So I do believe that the second term, right, this is really the new normal. I'm not saying that the new normal is like 50% tariff. It's more like don't expect it to be the time when Biden was around. So I think the last one is what the rebalancing global economic power, right? Shift aggregate demand from other countries back towards America, aiming to restore manufacturing jobs and reverse perceived economic imbalance. So I think this is really to restore domestic economic resilience and political stability. Political stability, I think it's all things associated with the securities. Basically, manufacturing needs to be back. Let's say if US get into any war, right, they want to have the ability to produce stuff on their own soil. So and there are a couple of other industry which they think that is very, very important, and they can't lose those industry, right? Chip manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, steel, energy, all these are all very important. I think this is all like the key points already or mentioned by the papers. And then basically what I did is actually I throw this entire paper to ChatGPT and try to query the ChatGPT, right? The other thing that I asked is that, okay, they do all these trades barriers, right? Impose all this tariff, right? That means stuff in US will be very, very expensive, and all this inflation will be super high, and then US peoples will be upset of Trump. They will basically vote him out of the office, right? Or even remove him before the terms is up, right? So then I asked, like, would that cause huge inflation, right? So I think this also is mentioned in the paper. So basically, I think the key point is this, right? Just refer back to the Trump's first term where he also imposed some tariff, right? But actually inflation didn't go up a lot. The reason is because when they imposed tariff, right, actually USD will strengthen at least over the short term. And assuming there is sufficient currency offset, right? Currency offset means that now, for example, let's say they impose tariff on China, and then China RMB just devalue against US dollar, right? Even after the tariff, stuff in US, right, could still be okay. Still, there will be some inflation. Let's say the tariff is 20%. RMB devalued by 20%. So if these two offset, right, that means on US side, right, it just like they don't feel the inflations because it will just be offset, right? And this is really the case in 2018 to 2019. Tariff up, but the currency offset quite a sizable portions of the tariff. That's why we didn't see high inflation. But if this is the case, right, then there's also no incentive to move manufacturing back to US. And we don't know whether this currency offset will happen or not. It's just that at least short term, at least based on this episode that we have seen. So then if we just look at the theoretical considerations, right, there are two possibilities, right? The first one is that let's say if there's this currency offset, then what happens is that US will charge the tariff, and then let's say nation like China, they will experience the currency offset, meaning that their people is worse off, right? Because their currency, their net worth is all getting lower, right? Essentially, that's the logic of the exporting nations paying the tariff, okay? So that's the first one. That this is a scenario where there's a currency offset. If there's no currency offset, right, that means all these items that is imported from, let's say like China, it will become more expensive. Then there will be incentive to bring the manufacturing back to US, right? Because if you bring let's say some companies, they just bring the manufacturing back and then they will set up factories in US. Then now at least all these factories, right, in terms of the price, they are competing with the imported goods that is after tariff, right? So at least there's reason to set up factories already because at least you have all this incentive, right? You can avoid the tariff. If that's the case, then the tariff revenue, right, will be lesser, but at least the manufacturing job is back, right? So it's also good. So basically that's the logic. It's like you will either be painful on inflations, but you get the manufacturing back, or inflation side, we are fine, but at least our US treasuries will get the revenue, and that will actually, they can take the money and then do all sorts of other things, including tax cut, right? So basically that's the scenarios. I think the inflation offset is also quite interesting because we don't have many different events to study all these things. It's more like theoretical. We don't know for sure, but at least there will be consequences, like whether there will be currency offset or not. So all these are mentioned, like, if you read the papers, right, it's a lot longer to talk about all these things. There are some, research paper being referenced. It's very economic topics when we talk about all these things. But at least it's more structured in terms of like how to argue what is the implications. Yeah, basically you can read about this. Basically whether there's a currency offset or not, the situation is different. I won't go into more details on this now. I think all in all is that there's a paper out there that can really help you understand what Trump is trying to do. I think even it's 50 pages, right? Instead of reading 50 different articles about Trump, right, I will suggest you take some time to read this paper. It's really helpful in terms of like try to interpret. Because if you have a good understanding on all these things, right, at least you know. I'm not saying Trump is right. I'm just saying that at least you know his logic, right? When you read all these articles or the subsequent actions, you will have a better understanding on like what he's trying to do. If you don't even know, right, he's just like a madman, right? Then by definition, a madman nobody can understand. Then it will be very hard for you to interpret all sorts of new developments, and you will just keep on thinking, oh, he's a crazy man. He's a crazy man. Yes, he is a bit crazy, but even a crazy man still has his own logic, right? Try to understand his logic. I can't say that just reading a paper you can have 100% understanding, right? At least 20% is still better than 0%, right? That's why I think quite helpful to read all this stuff. Okay, let me just cover one last thing about the DCA, right? Because after talking about market hasn't bottomed, all these things, I just want to say that, let's say if you just have a DCA strategy, every month you just buy the same amount, right? Actually, you don't have to know like when you should, like you don't have to predict the bottom. Basically, you just buy the same amount. I think the people who are very interested to know, has the market bottom, right? I think these are the people who maybe already have some war chest, right? And then he just want to deploy, and preferably he want to deploy more at when the market is close to bottom. So that's why the whether the market is bottom or not, that one is very important, right? So I can definitely understand that. But let's say if you have a war chest, let's say 100,000, and you want to deploy, right? I would suggest to you need to cut this 100K to, let's say, like at least 1 year, right? At least, let's say you divide that 100,000, cut it out to, let's say, 12 different tranches, right? And just deploy. At least you get to deploy for 12 months, and hopefully market bottom somewhere within the next 12 months, right? Because if you just think that, oh, I thought that market is already bottom, and then you just firing all your shots within 3 months, right? And then market just have another new low in September, right? Then you just lost all your bullets, right? So that's why I would say that try to split your bullets evenly, at least over longer period, because with all these new changes that's upcoming, right? I think, I don't know, I would be surprised, let's say we get back to an all-time high in like, let's say 1 or 2 months. So I think these things can drag on. It's just that drag on, not to say that just because I'm super bearish or things like that. It's for two reasons. One is that market is really like draw down from a place where it is quite overvalued. That's one reason. And then second reason is because all these things, right, still new. The business side, the market side, there's so much uncertainty, right? And all this uncertainty is not going to be addressed within short period of time. You want to wait all these things stabilize, right? Including all the negotiations between US and China. All these things, it will take time, man. So just be patient. If you want to, like firing your shots, right? I would say that yes, you can do so. You can start already, but don't think that, oh, I need to get all these fires, like exhaust all these bullets in short period of time. Thanks a lot, guys, for tuning in. Really appreciate you all come here. Today, I think more people more than usual. We have 73 people here listening to me live. Last week video also doing quite well, right? I think more than 1,000 views. Appreciate you all coming here, give me all this support. Thanks a lot for coming. Thanks a lot for watching.